Okay, let's get started. So today we're really covering chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11 in Modern Real Estate Practices book. You all have the 20th edition, which is great. We have 34 questions to cover in the next 2 hours. So that's quite a few. So we're going to move a little quickly. Brokerage terms on the national exam. Okay, so a brokerage firm is a licensed business, either independent or a national franchise, with a physical address at which licensees work. They can specialize in residential, commercial, or property management. Employing broker, broker responsible for training and supervision of licensees. Managing or supervising broker, broker designed to supervise licensees for the employing broker. Sales associate, licensed real estate professional who must work for an employing broker. On the national exam, broker means employing or managing broker. Okay, so this is one of those distinctions between national and Colorado. The term broker in national means employing broker. In Colorado, everyone is a broker. Our education is more extensive, and as a result of it, we have associate brokers, employing brokers, and independent brokers in Colorado. Everyone's a broker in Colorado. In other states, the entry level is called a sales associate or a salesperson. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Managing brokers are responsible for what? Managing brokers or employing brokers are fully responsible for the actions performed in the course of real estate business by all sales associates licensed underneath that broker. What is the difference between independent contractor and employee? Okay. So what do you guys know about the difference between independent contractor and employee?
Employers work for hours, set the hours for daily.
Good. That's a key thing.
An independent contractor has to fill out the W-9 form and has to do their own tax.
Mm-hmm. An employee must fill out the W-2 and take direction from the employer. The employer sets aside Social Security contributions and at the end of the year gives the employee a W-4. An independent contractor must fill out a W-9 and he sets his own hours. He pays his own taxes and receives a 1099 at the end of the year. Most real estate licensees are independent contractors. So when we go to work for a brokerage, we'll be signing an independent contractor agreement. Very few real estate licensees are W-2. We're more likely to be an employee as a real estate licensee if we work for like a big corporation like McDonald's and we're in their real estate department helping them find locations for the next restaurant. Other than that, the traditional real estate licensee working for a real estate broker is an independent contractor. As such, the employing broker cannot say, you must come to this meeting and you must put in this many hours. It's really our choice. And it makes it a lot harder for employing managers to manage independent contractors. Unlicensed real estate assistants. Depending on the type of task performed, the real estate assistants may be required to have a real estate license. If a sales associate hires an assistant, she or he must ensure the assistant only performs activities which are qualified and allowed. An unlicensed assistant generally may perform duties that include clerical, office management, website development and maintenance, and production of marketing pieces, but with little direct contact with consumers. Rules and regulations around unlicensed real estate assistants vary state to state to ensure you are up to date with the local and state regulations where you operate your business. So that's kind of a catch-all. So an unlicensed person can have more of the office work, and it varies from state to state. What is the MLS, Keon?
Multiple listing service.
Multiple listing service, and what's its function? What's the purpose of it?
Which is real estate agent can see a lot of house on that MLS website.
Okay, CJ, tell me more about the MLS. Everything Keon said is true, but tell me more.
It's a marketing tool that we can use.
Great, and who are the members to the MLS?
Real estate agents and realtors.
Yes, real estate licensees. And the real estate licensees, of course, could be realtors. And then as the agents typically means that they have agency. So the MLS is a cooperative marketing tool used by real estate agents. Real estate agents place homes for sale on the service and agree to pay a cooperative agent that brings the buyer a commission rate such as 3%, as an example. Okay, so it's really a huge marketing tool. And frankly, it's an incredibly powerful tool for us. What does the term procuring cause mean? CJ?
It says the broker must have started or caused an uninterrupted chain of events that resulted in the sale.
Okay. So this is really important if we want to get paid, we have to be the procuring cause of the sale. So we have to be the reason the buyer is buying. So if our buyer goes around on a Sunday afternoon and finds new home construction without our help, we wouldn't be the procuring cause, and we wouldn't be likely to get paid that commission even if they had a buyer's agency agreement with us.
Todd, how is that documented?
Well, that's good. So there's the most common way it's documented and the most practical way it's documented is simply by writing the contract. If we're writing the contract form, then we're obviously the procuring cause. It gets to be a problem when we have we're working with a buyer and we're working with them for a month and we've showed them 200 homes, and on a Sunday afternoon they take a Sunday drive and they find a new home a new home builder that you hadn't showed them, and then they go to that new home builder and they fall in love with the model home and they write an offer on the spot. In that case, we're not procuring cause. So if we know that they're going to be looking for property, we want to call the builder in advance and establish procuring cause before our buyers go out there. It's really a bigger deal with new home construction, like that example I gave. Real estate math and commission calculations. Listing licensee negotiates a commission with the seller for the brokerage firm. So when we show up to list a property, which is really how the process all starts, someone calls us up and they say, Keon, I'd like you to come out and look at my house, and I'd like you to tell me how much you'll sell for, how long it will take, And how much will I net at the end? What will be my check that I'll receive at the cashier's check that I'll receive from the title company? How much will that be? So when you get a call from someone who wants to sell their house, they want to know those three things. How much is it going to cost? I mean, how much is their home going to sell for? How long is it going to take? And then at the end, what will they receive as far as their net proceeds? So you'll definitely want to show up being able to answer those questions. And in order to answer those questions, you'll be there and they'll be hiring you either in Colorado, either as a transaction broker or either as a listing agent, what we call a seller agent in Colorado. And as part of that role, one of the things you'll do is you'll negotiate a commission. And you're negotiating a commission with the seller and you're representing your brokerage firm, because the listing contract is really between the brokerage firm and the seller. So you may be negotiating a 4% commission, a 5% commission, a 6% commission, a 7% commission, an 8% commission. There is no quote standard, end quote. There is no quote standard, end quote. Okay, everything is negotiated and you're negotiating with the seller for your brokerage firm. Okay, and that's where the money's generated. So if the seller agrees to a 6% commission, that 6% is going to cover your brokerage firm, and it's also going to cover the cooperating brokerage firm. So more than likely about 3% will go to your firm and about 3% will go to the cooperative brokerage firm. The cooperative brokerage firm is the firm the buyer agent works at. Okay, so if you take a listing, Keon, of a $500,000 house and you negotiate a 6% listing, how much will the seller pay at closing in commission?
You said 6%?
6%.
That would be 30,000.
30,000. Now, more than likely, Keon, of that 30,000, if you're splitting that equally with the buyer's agent's brokerage firm, how much will your firm make and how much will the cooperating firm make?
So 30,000 divided 2 goes to cooperate company, whatever.
Yeah, cooperating brokerage firm. That means the brokerage firm the buyer agent works for.
Okay, so that would be.
If you agreed in the MLS to split the commission, which is pretty reasonable, how much would you get? How much would your firm get? And how much would their firm get?
I would get 70.
How much, Kim?
I divided by 4 for $30,000, so that I will get 7,500.
Why did you divide by 4?
Because the 6% is for me and my broker firm, and the other half of them goes to buyer. No, I don't know.
Okay, well, let me help with the terms. So what we have is we have the listing brokerage firm, and then the person who is the listing agent, they'll get half the commission. The other half of the commission will go with the cooperating brokerage firm, and that's the buyer's agent's firm.
1,500.
So you're just a little ahead of me there. But if we divided it equally, meaning you took a 6% listing And in the multiple listing service, you agreed to pay the cooperating brokerage firm 3% of your 6%, then your firm would get 15,000 and their firm would get 15,000. Okay? And that's how it's divided up at closing. Now, Keon, you have a relationship with your employing broker. You've negotiated your own commission split with your employing broker. So you'll get a percentage of that 15,000. So you either negotiated a 60%, a 70%, an 80%, or a 90% of that with your employing broker. So if you negotiated a 90% split and your employing broker only gets 10%, then your check at closing, Keon, would be 13,500.
Yes.
Your employing broker would get 1,500. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So one thing to take away from this is in almost all cases, all the commission starts with the seller, goes to the listing brokerage firm, gets shared with the cooperating brokerage firm, and then the two brokerage firms share with their licensees according to the agreements they have with their licensees. So for instance, if the sales price was $515,000 and a 5.5% commission was negotiated, that would be $28,000 in gross commission. If Amy's firm keeps 2.8% of the 5.5, Amy's firm gets $14,400. If the buyer's agent's firm gets 2.7%, then the buyer's agent's firm gets $13,905. If Amy has negotiated a 75-25 split with her broker, Amy gets a check at closing for $10,815. If Bob had negotiated a 65-35 with his broker, Bob's check at closing is $9,000. So Tim, how much did the seller pay at closing?
Seller paid for commission. He paid 28,325.
Good. CJ, how much did the buyer pay in this scenario how much did the buyer pay in commission?
The buyer did not pay commission.
That's right. And Keon, how much did Amy's broker receive at closing?
Hold on.
Tim, be ready to answer this question.
So 3,605. Did you say Amy or Bob?
Yes, so I think we're really close. I did my math. I got 3,505. Tim, what did you get?
Well, you said how much did Amy's firm earn?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, yes. What's your answer?
Well, if it's Amy's firm, in total, it's the 14,420.
Okay, and then here's what I meant to ask. How much did they net?
Okay, hang on a second.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. You're right. I asked how much they earned, and that's the correct answer. Amy's firm earned $14,000, and I meant to ask what they netted. And Kyung and I were answering that question.
So I have got 3,605.
Okay, that's what Kyung got too. So you guys are right. Oh yeah, you're exactly right. Okay, so we understand how that flows. So did you guys see how this is a pretty killer deal for the buyer?
Yeah.
Yeah, so look what Bob's getting a check at closing for $9,000, and the buyer's getting a house. Bob as the buyer's agent is getting 9,000. Now, CJ, would it be illegal for Bob to rebate 1,000 of his commission back to the buyer?
Yes.
No,
Oh, no.
it is not. So as agents, we can give our commission back to our principal, okay? And the reason we can is because we wouldn't have this money if it weren't for our principals. So it's said to come from our principals.
Does that fall under the third-party kickbacks at all? Or
No,
anything
this
like that?
isn't a third party.
Okay.
So the principal's not a third party. They're a primary party.
Sure. Okay.
That's the big difference. RESPA, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, make it illegal for real estate licensees to get kickbacks from third parties, specifically title and mortgage, okay? And that's a violation of the law. If Amy receives, Tim, would it be illegal for Amy to receive $1,000 check from her title company since she steered her seller to that title company?
Yes, because she would be the third party because the contract would be between the seller and the title company.
Yeah, I think it's between I see it as the seller and the buyer. And so I would see that she is a third party. So the third party is the title company as I see it. And the contract's between the seller and the buyer. And yes, it would be. But I think that's an interesting way you looked at it. I'm going to need to think about that also.
Yeah, because who is it that actually employs the closing title company?
So, sorry about that. That's great. So they're actually employed by the broker and by the seller and the buyer. They're actually employed by the seller and the buyer through the form called the closing instructions form.
Whichever one. Yep.
And they're also employed by the listing broker to be our scrivener.
Okay.
Tim, what are the 5 Sherman antitrust violations?
I've got price fixing, group boycotts, allocation of customers, allocation of markets, and tie-in agreements.
Good. So these are things to definitely memorize. And these are all about 2 or more agents working for different companies. So if the 4 of us, thank you. If the 4 of us work for the same brokerage company, we can do these things all day long without them being an antitrust violation. But if we work for different companies, then it's an antitrust violation. Okay? So if I happen to be your employing broker, I could say, we're going to set a listing commission at 9%. And so that's not price fixing because we're all within the same company. But if Kyung and Tim work for 2 different companies and over a cup of coffee, they decide what they're going to charge for a listing commission. They talk about how they're going to boycott a certain title company. They talk about how they're going to allocate customers by different groups or markets by different geographic areas. All those conversations would be a Sherman antitrust violation. And then in addition, you can't use one contract to bind parties to future contracts. Now we have something called, yes, Tim?
Quick question. What happens if you are representing the seller and you're going to sell their property and then they ask you to actually work as their buyer's agent?
That's really common and you really want to do that. And you do that with 2 separate agreements.
Okay.
And so in Colorado, you list their property with the exclusive right to sell listing contract form. So the exclusive right to sell. Go ahead and write that down. And then you become their agent as a buyer's agent or as a transaction broker through the exclusive right to buy contract.
Okay. And then that isn't part of the tie-in agreements.
No, a tie-in agreement, as I understand it, would be more if we bound a seller to future listing contracts. Like I'm going to be your listing agent on your next 5 homes.
Okay, I'm with you.
So when we take a listing in Colorado, we use the exclusive right to sell. When we engage in a relationship with a buyer, we use the exclusive right to buy. Those are the employment contracts written by the Real Estate Commission that we must follow. And that's how we list a seller. And that's how we, quote, list a buyer, is with those forms. The first question on each of those forms is, are you going to be an agent or a transaction broker? So that's the first 2 boxes that have to be checked. With the exclusive right to sell, are you going to be an agent for the seller or are you going to be a transaction broker? And then we'll talk a lot about how those 2 things are different. If we're an agent, we'll have fiduciary duty. And if we're a transaction broker, we won't have fiduciary duty. Okay. How are implied agency and expressed agency different? This simply talks about how we become an agent for our client. Implied agency is agency determined through our actions and may be unintentional or accidental. So if we sign up, so as I just mentioned, we could take a listing as a transaction broker, or we could take a listing as a seller's agent. CJ, what form do we use to list a home?
The the seller's agreement,
And what's that called?
the contract to buy and sell,
No.
or no?
What's the contract to buy and sell, CJ?
That is the transaction broker or the agency agreement.
No.
Am I getting mixed up?
Okay, listen up. The contract to buy and sell is the contract used between the buyer and the seller. It is the purchase contract in Colorado. So write that down. Contract to buy and sell is the contract between the buyer and the seller. It is the purchase contract in Colorado. Okay.
It's a listing agreement?
The listing agreement, what's the name of the listing agreement, CJ? And I just said it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll help you. It's the exclusive right to sell. And that's the name of the listing agreement in Colorado, the exclusive right to sell. And we use that same form every single time. So you guys will become experts at the exclusive right to sell. That's how we put a house on the market. And you'll become an expert at the contract to buy and sell. That's the contract we write when we're representing a buyer and they're making an offer on a house. Now, when a buyer is agreeing to hire us to be their agent, their buyer's agent, or their transaction broker, then we'll use the exclusive right to buy. CJ, what is the exclusive right to buy?
That is the buyer's agent paperwork.
Yes. And what's the purpose of that form?
That's to provide agency to the buyer.
Good. It establishes an exclusive relationship between the real estate licensee and a buyer. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So at the top of the exclusive right to sell, hey, Tim, what's the exclusive right to sell?
The exclusive right to sell is when you draw up a contract with your clients and to actually purchase a property, and you will receive commission for it.
Okay, I don't like your words a little bit, and I'm not, so the exclusive right to sell is the agreement to put a home on the market. A seller calls us up and says, Tim, I want you to put my home on the market. I want you to be my agent.
I thought you said right to buy.
Okay, the exclusive right to buy is when we represent the buyer. Okay, were you answering the exclusive right to buy?
Yes, because I thought that's the question that you asked.
Okay, I don't think so, but I could have. So,
Okay.
but go ahead but since I got you there, Tim, tell me what the three contracts are. So tell me what those three are that we're talking about here, and
So
what the purpose is for each.
Right, so we've got the exclusive right to sell, the
Mhm.
exclusive right to buy,
Okay,
and the purchase contract.
good. And what's the name of the purchase contract?
It's the contract to buy and sell.
Perfect. So that's perfect so far, Tim, and I'm going to keep you going with this. You have you mentioned the exclusive right to sell, you mentioned the exclusive right to buy, and you mentioned the contract to buy and sell.
Yep.
Perfect. What is the purpose of the exclusive right to sell?
The exclusive right to sell gives you sole agency with the seller.
Great. And what's the purpose of the exclusive right to buy?
Gives you sole agency for the buyer.
Okay. And what's the purpose of the contract to buy and sell?
Contract to buy and sell is to bring the seller and the buyer together on an agreed contract.
Great. Who typically writes that? And who typically writes it?
It would be the buyer's agent who initiates the offer.
That's right. Okay. Because they're showing the property. The buyer says, I must have this house. They go to Starbucks, they write this up. Or they go to the office and they write it up. Guillaume,
Yeah.
what are the three contracts that we're talking about?
Exclusive right to sell, exclusive right to buy, and contract buy and sell.
Good. And what's the purpose of each?
Exclusive right to sell is listing agreement with the seller and for listing for their seller's home.
Perfect.
And that is you are going to get the money even the seller is seller don't want to contract later, but still you're gonna get the money. I don't know. Is that right?
Just tell me, just don't read it. Just tell me what you know. What's the exclusive right to buy?
Exclusive right to buy is for represent for buyer, and still you're gonna get the money even.
So why would we have the exclusive right to buy, Guillaume? What's the purpose of that?
It's an agreement with a buyer.
And what's the contract to buy and sell?
Contract buy and sell is contract or represent for buyer and seller.
Not to represent, it's the contract that allows the buyer and the seller to negotiate the purchase of a property.
Oh, okay.
Okay, CJ, what's the first question whether the first two boxes, what's the first question that has to be answered On the exclusive right to sell or the exclusive right to buy?
If you are acting as a agent or a transaction broker.
Good. So the very first question on the Colorado forms, the exclusive right to sell and the exclusive right to buy is, as a licensee, are you working as an agent or are you working as a transaction broker? Because both of those are two different ways we could represent that client. And it talks about agency. And so if we check the box that we're a seller's agent, then we've established our agency through the process of expressed agency, because we actually did it in writing or through our words or by written, by checking the box. We've done it through expressed agency. Now, CJ, if we checked the box transaction broker, but we're giving the seller advice and we're helping them in a way that shows we're an advocate, can you explain what just happened there?
That would be your uniform duties.
Okay, no, because we're
No.
being an advocate.
Okay.
So that's
So-
beyond uniform.
Right.
So,
So that would
here's the
be-
scenario for you, CJ. We checked the box transaction broker. So that means we're not an advocate, right? However, our actions, we're giving them advice and we're acting as an advocate for them. So what just happened?
So that is your implied agency then.
Yeah. So can you see where our implied agency said we were an agent, our expressed agency said we were a transaction broker? So because of that, guess what? If they write a letter to the real estate commission, we're going to get in trouble. Exactly. Because we're saying in writing, we're saying we're a transaction broker. Through our actions, we're saying we're an agent with fiduciary duty. So this is why we're studying what implied agency is and expressed agency is, to see how we could accidentally do both. Okay, so Tim, summarize implied agency and expressed agency.
Implied agency is when you are impartial to both parties and you cannot give them advice.
Okay, say that again for me.
Implied agency is when you have a duty to complete the transaction without providing fiducial oversight to either party.
Okay, guess what I did, Tim? I got you confused. So we're looking at 4 terms. So on your sheet of paper, write down implied agency, write down expressed agency, and then across the sheet, write down transaction broker and write down agency.
So, sorry, across the top,
Yeah, so,
transaction broker,
and agency. So, Keong and Tim, all we're learning with implied agency and expressed agency is how we raise our hand to the world. We either raise our hand through our actions or we raise our hand in our words or in writing. Okay? These don't speak about fiduciary duty per se. These just say how we're raising our hand.
okay.
So if we checked the box that says we were a transaction broker, we did that through expressed agency because it was written.
Right, so transaction broker is an express agent.
No. No, we could have checked the box agency, and then we would have expressed our agency by checking that box. So expressed just means written or oral. And it could be transaction or it could be agency.
Okay, I'm getting you.
This is just the process. Implied could be transaction broker or agency. This is just our actions. So if we did expressed agency and check the box that we're an agent with fiduciary duties, but our actions show no advocacy whatsoever, then again, we're in conflict.
Yep.
So this is only showing us how we could tell the world how we're representing them, either through our actions, which is implied, or through expressed, which is oral and written.
Okay, so the expressed agency is the first thing you tick on the contract. And if you then do something that is contrary to that signed document, it then becomes an implied agency.
Say that again, Tim.
So the first question on the contract is transaction broker or agency.
Right, so that's so true. So the first question on the exclusive right to sell and the exclusive right to buy is whether or not Tim is going to be an agent. So let's say Tim's taking a listing and you're at a house, they invited you over and your neighbor wants to sell their house, Tim. You show up with the exclusive right to sell. That's the listing contract.
Yep.
Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. At the top of that contract is 2 boxes. The first box says Tim's going to be a seller's agent. The second box says Tim's going to be a transaction broker. So right at that moment, with negotiation with the seller, you're determining whether you're going to be an agent for them or whether you're going to be more of a broker for the transaction. If you're an agent for them, you'll have fiduciary duty. You with me?
Yep.
Okay. Now, this is just a concept. Now, Keong, are you with me also?
Yeah.
About the exclusive right to sell, you show up, you have 2 choices. Either an agent with fiduciary duty or a transaction broker without fiduciary duty. You follow that or not yet?
Not yet.
That's okay. Good answer. We're going to get to that later. We'll cover that extensively. Tim?
Yep.
All we're learning with implied and expressed is how we raise our hand.
Okay.
Okay. Implied means we raise our hand through our actions.
Yep.
Expressed means we raise our hand orally or written.
Okay.
Okay, so we could choose, and so if we don't, and what I was highlighting is it's easy for us to get in conflict through our actions, and our written contract could easily not match.
Right.
And that's what I was pointing out.
Okay.
Okay. What are an agent's fiduciary duties to his or her principal? So CJ, we're in the national section here. First of all, what does fiduciary duty mean? If you were to explain fiduciary duty, CJ, in just one short sentence, what would it be? Or a phrase?
Trust. I guess
Okay,
it's a lot of trouble.
If you were to reduce fiduciary duty to one word, trust is a really good word to use. If you were to reduce fiduciary duty to a phrase, the phrase I'd want you to use is putting your principal before you. Okay, write that down. Fiduciary duty means putting your principal before you. That means we have to seek what they want before we can do what we want. Okay, we can't get in conflict with what our wants and their wants. Fiduciary duty means they come first. Okay, and now professions that have fiduciary duties are real estate agents, doctors, lawyers, many financial representatives, teachers. Those all have fiduciary duties. Professions that don't have fiduciary duties, retail, car sales, any sort of retail, any sort of business-to-business transactions, those typically do not have fiduciary duties. Everyone looks out for themselves. If you're in a profession with fiduciary duty, you have to put the client before you. And that's a doctor, a lawyer, a real estate licensee. Okay, so if we were to define fiduciary duty in one word, I'll go with CJ's word because it was very good, trust. If we were to define fiduciary duty in a phrase, we would say putting our client before us. Putting our client's needs before us. If we were to define fiduciary duty in the national section with an acronym, I would go with COLD AC. So write this down, COLD AC. And that's where we have to show care, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, and confidentiality. Cold AC. So we have to show reasonable skill, reasonable care and skill. We have to be obedient to their instructions. The agent has to be above agent's self-interest, okay? Disclosure, material facts known by agents, accounting of all funds entrusted to the agent, and confidentiality of principals motivating factors. This is how we describe fiduciary duties in the national section. CJ, how do we describe fiduciary duties in Colorado?
It is section 6 of the contract to buy and sell,
No.
or the exclusive right to sell.
Yes.
There we go.
In the because remember, contract to buy and sell just talks about the property.
Yeah.
Because that's just between the buyer and the seller. The exclusive right to sell and the exclusive right to buy, section 6 talks about fiduciary duty. So Tim and Keon, just so you guys get a preview, in the exclusive right to sell, section 6, here's what it says. It says that the agent will act with utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. Section 6 of the exclusive right to sell says that the agent will act with utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. That's 6.1. 6.2 says the agent will seek the seller's price and terms. And 6.3 says the agent will counsel the seller about material benefits and risks. Okay?
And that's in the Colorado right to sell.
Yep, that's in the Colorado exclusive right to sell. So what I'm showing you guys here is we have the national definition of fiduciary duty, and then we're going to have the Colorado definition of fiduciary duty. Okay? And for the national part of the test, you're going to have to use this language. For the Colorado part of the test, you're going to use Colorado language. Pretty challenging, huh?
Yeah, I haven't even opened up the PSI Colorado book yet.
Okay,
I'm just trying to
yeah,
get my
that
head around
PSI book, Tim, just so you know, is national.
it. Even the blue one.
Yes, that's national also.
Okay.
Okay. The Colorado book is the e-book.
Okay.
Okay. So on the national side, this is how we describe fiduciary duty. So CJ, in one word, how would we describe fiduciary duty?
Trust.
In a phrase, how would we describe fiduciary duty?
Putting the principle before yourself.
Good. In an acronym, how would we describe fiduciary duty?
Cold AC.
And what's that?
Care, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, and confidentiality.
Perfect. That's the great way to learn about fiduciary duty. An agent means with agency, and that means with fiduciary duty. Okay? And it's a very special thing. It's really what makes doing real estate so much fun and so meaningful. We get to treat people at a very deep level. Okay? It's not just a transaction. It's not like we're just helping them buy a Corvette. Okay, what must you disclose, might you disclose, and cannot disclose? A seller and agent must disclose latent defects and material defects that are obvious, such as whether mold in the walls or the neighbors have really obnoxious parties. That's a must disclose. Might disclose anything with permission. Cannot disclose. An agent does not have the seller or buyer's permission to disclose information about the seller without their permission. Okay. Remember we're in the national section, and the purpose of the national section is to learn a lot of vocabulary. So now we have 3 more vocabulary terms. We were talking about agency, and Tim, I asked CJ to describe, I said agency could be described as having fiduciary duty. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Now, and I said fiduciary duty could be described in a word and a phrase. What was the word
Trust.
CJ used? Trust. And what was the phrase?
The phrase was putting your principal before yourself, or
Good.
ensure that their needs are above your own.
Good. That's what agency means. Okay. So agency and fiduciary duty go hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yep.
If we're an agent, then we have agency, which means we have fiduciary duty. So that's just an automatic line. If we're an agent, we have agency, which means we have fiduciary duty. If we have fiduciary duty, that means there's a special trust, and it means we have to put them first. And if we were to describe that in an acronym, we would use cold AC. Now, agency, meaning fiduciary duty, can have 3 levels. universal, general, and special. And this just speaks to kind of the scope of agency. Okay, this doesn't show up in a contract as a proper noun. This is just a descriptor of agency. These are not proper nouns. These are just descriptors. So if we have universal agency, that's typically done through a power of attorney. And so if I give Tim a power of attorney, he could sell my car, my house, and my kidney. Universal agency is established through a power of attorney, and it's an unlimited power. An unlimited power of attorney, okay? That's called universal agency. So this is what we might see within a family member if they were going to have surgery. Through an unlimited power of attorney, they would give us permission to handle all their affairs. That's called a universal agency. Okay. The next level down is called a general agency. This is where we can help someone with a line of business activities. Kind of like a sports agent is more of a general agency. They can help the sports person or with their advertising, their marketing, their business, their accounts, and so forth. That's a general agency. Real estate licensees live in this level of agency with their employing broker. Their employing broker says, Guillaume, we're going to establish a general agency relationship with each other, and I'm going to ask you to go out and list hundreds of houses in the next 5 years, okay? A general agency. Guillaume's going to list many, many houses on behalf of her brokerage, because that exclusive right to sell is a contract between the seller and the brokerage firm. And Guillaume represents the brokerage firm. And so Guillaume will have a general agency relationship with her brokerage firm. Another way a real estate licensee establishes a general agency is when we act as a property manager. So a landlord will contact us and say, CJ, I want you to be the property manager for this fourplex and this fourplex that I own. And CJ says, I'll happy to do that. I charge 10% of rents. And for that, I will make sure the units are filled with tenants. I'll make sure you have proper insurance on the property. I'll make sure they're well maintained. I'll do background checks, and I'll handle when there's maintenance that needs to be done. I'll get the right maintenance person out there. CJ's established an ongoing business activity, and therefore he's acting in the general agency realm. Most work we do as real estate licensees is as a special agent. We're hired for one purpose. Tim, your neighbor called you up. They said, come over and list our house. Tell us how much it's going to sell for, how long it's going to take, and how much we're going to get at the end. And they're hiring you to do one thing, and that's sell their house. And that's called special agency. You're hired for one specific purpose. And then they say, Tim, I want you to help us find a house. And therefore you're going to you're going to whip out your exclusive right to buy form. And you're also going to be a special agent because you're going to help them find a specific house. So the majority of our work is as a special agent, kind of like 007, James Bond. Okay, so these things just describe agency, okay, and how there's different levels of agency. These are not proper nouns. You will never, oops, sorry, you will never see these terms in a contract. This is just for us to understand there's levels of agency, okay? Because this is the national section, and it's all about giving us an understanding, a foundation.
So basically what you're saying is this is all the legalese behind what we do.
Yes, this is the rationale behind, this was the rationale behind the development of contracts and rights and duties. Yeah, this is the rationale behind it. Okay, so we're talking about agency, right? And then agency, if we're talking about agency, then we must also be talking about a word that starts with an F, CJ. What word is that?
Fiduciary duties.
Fiduciary duties. And Keon, in one word, what one word describes fiduciary duties, Keon?
Putting yourself before yourself.
Just one
Or
word? No,
trust.
that's a phrase. That was my next question. But what's one word that CJ says that describes fiduciary duty?
Trust.
Trust. Good. And Tim, what's the phrase that describes fiduciary duty?
It's putting your principle before yourself.
Perfect. And CJ, what's the acronym that describes fiduciary duty?
Cold AC.
Great. Tim, what are the 3 levels of agency?
Universal, general, and special.
Great. As an agent for your employing broker, Tim, what type of agent are you? Which of those 3 levels?
Would be the type, it would be a general agent because you're doing multiple things.
Good. Keon, as an
Yeah.
agent for your client, what type are you?
You mean general agency?
No, most of the times we're a special agent because we're hired for one act. CJ, what's the difference between single agency and dual agency?
Single is when you're only representing either the buyer or the seller, and dual is when you're representing both.
Good. And what's agency mean, CJ?
It's uniform plus fiduciary duties.
In Colorado, right?
Mhm.
In the national section, what's agency mean?
Let's see here.
You just said it. Just everything we just said.
Just cold AC and just everything.
Yeah, so agency means we have fiduciary duties. Fiduciary duties can mean we have trust. It means putting them before us, and it means cold AC, care, obedience, loyalty, accounting, disclosure, and accounting.
Okay.
So single agency is an agency relationship between a real estate agent and one party, either the buyer or the seller in the same transaction. So we represent the buyer or we represent the seller. That's called single agency. Dual agency is when an agency relationship exists in a real estate between a real estate agent and the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Some states allow dual agency with very specific rules. Colorado does not allow dual agency, instead requiring licensees to utilize a transaction broker relationship. Subagent, we'll cover very little on subagent. All you need to know about subagent is it's an agent for an agent. It's an agent who works for an agent. Okay, this is an outdated concept. It's been replaced with the updated agency. So we used to, I won't get into it goes way back. Okay, now in the national section, we have disclosed and undisclosed dual agency. So CJ, could you describe dual agency for me?
Dual agency is when you're representing the buyer and the seller on the same transaction.
Great. And when you say the word representing, what do you mean?
You're acting as an agent for them, so you're performing uniform and fiduciary duties.
Okay, so it means you have fiduciary duties to the buyer and the seller in the same transaction.
Mhm.
Is dual agency illegal in Colorado?
Yes.
Yes. In some states, they've really tried to parse this out, and they've created something called disclosed dual agency and undisclosed dual agency. And they said, we're going to allow dual agency. And Colorado said, that's just not even possible. But some states said, we're going to allow dual agency as long as it's disclosed to the parties. And we're going to take away some of the deeper meanings of agency. So disclosing dual agency in states that allow it alerts the buyers and the sellers that they have to assume greater responsibility for protecting their own interests. Okay. Unintentionally creating dual agency can occur when a licensee is careless and does not understand fiduciary duties. This violates license law and can result in the rescission of the sales contract, forfeiture of a commission, and a lawsuit for damages and potential license problems. So if we ever accidentally act as a dual agent in Colorado, it could ruin everything and we'll get in big trouble.
So basically what you're saying is it can lead to conflict of interest.
Oh, without a doubt. So in Colorado, we say dual agency on its face is a conflict of interest.
Okay.
In Colorado, we say it's impossible to seek the seller's top price while seeking the buyer's bottom price. That's just not possible in Colorado. You know, there's no way we could do that for the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. So Colorado says there's no way we could be an agent for the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. So Colorado says we have to take a step back and not be an agent for either. Instead, we're going to be a transaction broker for the transaction. And we're not going to be an advocate for the seller, and we're not going to be an advocate for the buyer. All we're going to do is make sure everything's done legally and properly. And we're going to let the buyer and the seller box it out, and we're going to be the referee. And that's called transaction broker in Colorado. In other states, they might call it disclosed dual agency. In Colorado, we call it transaction broker. In other states, they might call it disclosed dual agency. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Did I blow your mind, Keon?
Yeah, I just wake up, so my brain doesn't work well.
Okay. Now we have one other term, coffee, lots of coffee. What is designated agency and how does it protect the employing broker from dual agency? So if you look at your exclusive right to sell, the first real sentence says that the real estate broker taking the listing with the exclusive right to sell has been designated by the brokerage firm. Okay? And so if you were to look at your exclusive right to sell, which we know is the listing contract between the brokerage firm and the seller, it says that the broker, Tim, who's up at your kitchen table, is designated to represent the brokerage. Okay? And this allows then for Tim to have an agency relationship with the seller, while it allows CJ to have an agency relationship with a buyer, even though CJ and Tim both work for Todd's Tremendous Houses, the best brokerage firm in the country, and there would not be an illegal dual agency, because CJ's designated to the buyer, Tim's designated to the seller. Tim has fiduciary duty to the seller, CJ has fiduciary duty to the buyer. Because in those listing contracts we designated, parsed them out, separated them, we don't have to worry about the illegal dual agency. Okay?
Quick question. Are we then allowed to discuss the deal between ourselves?
No, here, let me answer that. Tim, you're a seller's agent. You've been designated a seller's agent. CJ's been designated in his exclusive right to buy as the buyer's agent. You are designated in the exclusive right to sell as the seller's agent. So you guys come back to the office at Todd's Tremendous Houses and you guys battle it out. And Tim, you seek the highest price and you advocate for the seller's price and terms, as you're required to do.
Because it's
And
my traditional
CJ
duty.
shows up at the same conference table and he's advocating for the buyer's price and terms.
Right?
And you guys battle it out. You're in this mortal combat because you have fiduciary duty. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And even though you're both part of Todd's Tremendous Houses and you're going to go out to happy hour at 4 o'clock, that doesn't mean that we set up an illegal dual agency.
Right. I just wanted to clear that up.
And then of course, I'm using a lot of fun hyperbole to say you're battling it out. You'll use your highly trained negotiation skills to persuade each other.
Okay.
You really won't get each other in a headlock.
You don't know that, Tim.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, hey, I used to play rugby, so it's not a problem.
Okay. What's the difference between an agent and a non-agent? An agent has fiduciary responsibilities to the client, such as cold AC, and seeks his client's price and terms. An agent is like a coach for the client. A non-agent, also called transaction broker, has duties to the transaction and not specifically to the buyer or seller. The licensee is more like a referee, making sure everything is done according to the rules. So, CJ, if you were a transaction broker for the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, you would act like a referee and making sure that all the contract is properly handled, but you can't advocate for the seller and you cannot advocate for the buyer. You just kind of get them together and you provide information and you let them battle it out. And that can be it can be really productive or it can be really non-productive. It just depends on your skill. Okay? It is similar to being a mediator. Okay? It's similar to that sort of a role. What's the difference between a client and a customer? A client is to receive fiduciary duties from an agent. An agent is to be the advocate for the client and puts the client's needs first. An agent is essentially on the same team as the client and acts as the coach. A customer is someone with whom the agent has no fiduciary relationship. Customers are still owed honest and fair dealings. Okay? We always owe the public honest and fair dealings. What is the difference between puffing and fraud? Puffing is a term and it's called legal exaggeration. This house has the best lake view ever. That's puffing and it's legal. Fraud is the misrepresentation of facts and it's illegal. Okay? Puffing is a normal part of sales. Fraud is an illegal act and a misrepresentation of facts. What is a latent defect? A latent defect is a hidden material defect actually known and must be disclosed. This is an example of a material defect where we have a big crack in the foundation. If this was drywalled over so we couldn't see it, then it would be a latent defect because it would be hidden. All latent defects and material defects need to be disclosed. Okay. What is a stigmatized property? Give examples. A stigmatized property is simply a property with a bad reputation, okay? It is not a material fact. It is not a latent defect, okay? A house can be stigmatized because of suicide, murder, haunting, or other actions, okay? You'll run into that. That's actually something you'll run into, okay? A stigmatized property is a house with a bad reputation. There's no disclosure required, okay? No disclosures required on stigmatized properties, okay? What are the differences between the exclusive right to sell and the exclusive agency contracts? So in Colorado, we have one listing contract, and that's an exclusive right to sell, okay? The Real Estate Commission did us a big favor. They could have written 2 contracts that we would have to present. Instead, they did us a big favor and they only wrote 1 contract. And so we always show up with the exclusive right to sell. Now, these 2 are both listing contracts. In Colorado, we only have the exclusive right to sell, thank goodness. But it's possible in other states, there's the exclusive right to sell and there's an exclusive agency, okay? Now, with the exclusive agency, we only get paid if we're the procuring cause. If the seller sells this house to his brother or his neighbor or his friend, we don't get paid because we weren't procuring cause. With the exclusive right to sell, if the seller sells the house to his neighbor, his friend, or his brother, and we had nothing to do with it, we still get paid. So the difference between these 2 listing contracts is with the exclusive right to sell, we do not have to be procuring, we do not have to establish procuring costs. Okay, Tim, what did I just say?
Basically, in Colorado, there is only the one contract, which is the exclusive right to sell.
Okay. Keep going.
And the exclusive agency listing is used in other states.
Cool, perfect.
And it's basically that it doesn't compel the seller to pay you a commission.
If we were not procuring cause.
Yes.
And what does procuring cause mean, Tim?
Procuring cause means that we are the instrument that causes the contract.
I like it. And then, so now there's something called an open listing agreement. This is something we never see, but remember, this is the national section. The national section is just about giving you a broad understanding of the whole world of real estate, okay? So they're gonna tell you about an open listing. An open listing is a listing agreement that allows the seller to hire more than one agent from more than one company to sell his house. Only the agent that procures the buyer gets paid, okay? So let's all pretend we work for different brokerage offices. Tim works for Tim's houses, Keon works for Keon's houses, CJ works for CJ's houses. You are 3 different brokerage firms. You all are called by this seller, and he says, okay, Tim, Keon, and CJ, I'm only gonna do open listings. I'm not gonna do exclusive listings. The opposite of an open listing is an exclusive listing, okay? And then you guys agree. So now each of you puts a yard sign in this seller's house. The only one who gets paid is the one who brings the buyer. That's called an open listing. This is not at all common. I've never seen it. And there'd be, you would have incentive not to participate. Make sense?
Yep.
A net listing. Net listings in Colorado are not illegal, but they're highly discouraged because of a conflict of interest. A net listing is when you take a listing and you say, seller, the seller says to you, Todd, as long as I walk away with 300,000, everything above that would be your commission. So if the proceeds were 301,000, my commission is 1,000. If the proceeds were 400,000, then my commission is 100,000. So therefore, you could see why the real estate commission says, oh, this is wrought with potential abuse. Todd's gonna talk the seller into a net listing at 300,000, knowing that the proceeds are gonna be 400,000, and Todd's gonna get a commission of 100,000. That is not a good example of agency where he put his client before himself. So net listings are highly discouraged because they are legal, but they likely set up a conflict of interest. This is actually very common with mobile homes. Any questions on a net listing?
Nope.
Why do most states require a definite termination date on listing contracts? A definite termination date or expiration date on the listing contract, either agency listing or exclusive right to sell listing, helps prevent an agent from abandoning a listing and providing poor service. It's in the public's best interest to require termination dates on all listing contracts. Colorado regulation makes all listing contracts without a termination date void. Okay? We can't, Tim, you just can't list your neighbor's house forever. It's got to be for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. It's got to have an expiration date.
Okay.
For the protection of the public. So we have an exclusive right to sell, which doesn't require procuring costs, an exclusive agency, which does require procuring costs, and an open listing where they can have 4 or 5 or 20 different brokerages have yard signs in their front yard, and only the agent that has procuring costs gets paid. So exclusive right doesn't require procuring costs. Exclusive agency does require procuring costs. Open listing is with many brokerages and does require procuring costs. CJ, what's procuring costs?
Procuring costs is when you have an uninterrupted chain of events. That means that you've led from searching to the sale.
Good. And Tim, this is a little bit of a trick question. What happens if the employing broker and the seller die during the listing period of a listing contract?
Well, that's quite an easy one, actually, because if either of them die, the seller has got a contract with the broker and you can't complete a contract with a dead person.
That's very true. I tried once. It didn't go well. It went on forever. Didn't seem to make a decision. You're absolutely right. It's void. What is the broker protection clause? In Colorado, it's called the holdover clause in the listing contract. So the broker protection clause is in the listing contract. In Colorado, it's called the holdover clause, and it's in the listing contract. Tim, what's the name of the listing contract in Colorado?
The exclusive right to sell.
Thank you. The broker protection clause protects the agent from a seller canceling the contract or waiting for the listing contract to expire and then proceeding with the sale with a buyer the agent procured. So the broker protection clause protects the broker from the seller going behind our back and negotiating directly with the buyer and not paying us. So the broker protection clause protects us. It even protects us after our contract expires, as long as we provided the seller with the buyer's information. And it's typically tied to a number of days, like such as 90 days. But it could be 30 days, it could be 180 days. And so, Tim, if you're the seller and I'm your agent and I listed your house for 90 days and I had an additional 90 days written into the broker protection clause, at the end of the first 90 days, the listing contract expired. I give you a list of the buyers I showed the house to. You take that list and you call them, and one of them says, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about your house. I want to buy it. You finish the deal with that buyer. Guess what? I still get paid.
Yep.
That's called the broker protection clause. And so I would send you a bottle of wine and I would say thank you. And I'd ask you to send me my 6% on that $500,000 sale. And you can send me a check for $30,000. What are the 5 elements of a valid contract? Offer and acceptance, consideration, legally competent parties, consent, and legal purpose. So there must be offer and acceptance. There must be consideration, which means a promise by both parties. The parties must be competent. That means they can't be mentally impaired. They can't be, there must be consent, meaning there can't be coercion, and it has to be for a legal purpose. What is the difference between an expressed contract and implied contract? So remember earlier, we learned that expressed meant written or spoken, and we learned implied meant actions. That was the same for agency as it is for contracts. So expressed means written or spoken, and implied means through actions. Express contracts are written or spoken. Real estate contracts, according to a law called the Statute of Frauds, must be in writing to be enforceable. So CJ, if I said, I'll sell you my house for $300,000 and CJ says deal, we would have a valid contract. However, it wouldn't be enforceable because it wasn't in writing. Okay? What is the difference between a unilateral contract and a bilateral contract? So we're just talking about the prefix uni for one or bi for two. Unilateral contracts require only one party to act, and that's kind of like an option. A unilateral contract has one promise. A bilateral contract requires both parties to act or do something, such as a buy and sell contract. There's two promises. The seller promises to sell, the buyer promises to buy. Unilateral contracts are very rare, and that's why there's an option. Like an option contract, if I bought an option, I have the right to exercise it or not. I don't have an obligation to exercise it. What is an executory contract? An executory contract is one that has yet to be fully performed, such as an agreement to purchase that has not yet closed. So this is where the buyer and the seller have agreed in writing, but the transaction hasn't closed. That's called an executory contract. It's an important term because once the buyer signs and the seller signs, the buyer has certain rights. Those rights are called equitable rights. So write that down. The buyer has equitable rights to the property once the buyer and the seller sign the contract to buy and sell. Once the property closes, then the buyer has legal rights. So another way of saying it, a better way of saying it even, is a buyer has equitable title, and once it closes, then the buyer has legal title. Okay? An executory contract means both parties have signed it, and the buyer has equitable title. Okay? That means the buyer has some sort of title ownership to that property. Okay? And then once it closes, then that changes to legal title, which means full title, full ownership. What is the difference between valid, void, voidable, and unenforceable contracts? A valid contract is in full force and effect. Okay, a valid contract is in full force and effect. A void contract was never created due to a defect. Okay, so if Tim says, Todd, sign this contract to buy my house, and if you don't, I'm going to shoot you with a gun. So therefore there is coercion, and a contract was never established, even though I signed it and he signed it, okay? Because there was coercion, it wasn't voluntary. It was missing one of those key elements, which meant there had to be consent. Consent was never given because of coercion. Therefore, the contract, even though Tim can show a contract signed by him and me, it never existed. Okay? That's what void means.
Anyway.
What's that?
I said I'll shoot you anyway because you told me.
No, Tim, say it isn't so. Okay, voidable. Voidable is a contract which may be canceled by one party, such as a minor or mentally impaired person. So if Tim and I agree on a contract, and I agree to buy his house in writing, and he agrees to sell his house in writing, we don't have an issue with the statute of frauds because it was in writing. Right now, it seems like a valid contract. However, when I signed the contract, it was after I had 6 martinis. I no longer had capacity to sign the contract. Guess what? It's voidable by me, not by him. He was not drunk. I was drunk. So I could move forward with the contract if I want. He must move forward with the contract. It's voidable by me, not by him. He wasn't drunk. He has to stick to it. I was drunk. I haven't. It's my choice. Okay, that's what voidable means. Unenforceable. An unenforceable contract meets the test, but is not actionable by both parties, such as a real estate contract made verbally. So this is where I agreed to sell my house to CJ and he agreed to buy it, but we just did it via Zoom. We're both legally competent. We meet all the criteria, but it wasn't in writing, so it's not enforceable. So what I want you to remember is void was never created. Most people think it's canceled. No, it was never created. It's like it never existed, okay? Voidable means it's voidable by one of the parties, the impaired party. What's the difference between the term assignment and novation? Assignment is when you substitute your right. Assignment is when you assign your right to someone else. So an example is Keon is selling her house and Tim is buying her house. They sit down at the kitchen table and they fill out the contract to buy and sell, okay? And they're both competent parties. Now, they agree in the contract that the contract's assignable by Tim. So Tim at any time could sell his rights as the buyer, because we said he had equitable rights with an executory contract, for instance. Tim can sell his rights as the buyer. He sells his rights to CJ. And he says, CJ, I'm in this great deal with Keon. She needed to sell right away because she just won the lottery and she's going to buy a mansion. So she didn't care about the price. I got a great deal. But as it turns out, I don't have time to close this deal. I want you to be the buyer. And CJ says, I'm happy to be the buyer. In fact, Tim, I'll give you $5,000 if you assign your position as the buyer to me. CJ gives Tim $5,000 and Tim assigns the contract to CJ. Now, Keon is in a contract with CJ. Keon's the seller, CJ is the buyer. Tim has left the deal with $5,000. Keon is happy because she won the lottery and she's buying a mansion. CJ is happy because he's buying a property at a good price. That's called assignment, okay? This is something which there used to be a checkbox for in the contract to buy and sell. They took the checkbox out because too many people were checking it and it was putting the seller in too bad of a spot. And the reason I say that is Keon had no rights. Tim could assign the house to me, and I live under a bridge, and I could never afford to buy the house. And Keon would be stuck with me as the buyer, okay? So she didn't have any protection there, okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Novation is when you substitute one contract for another with the same terms, but you just make it easier to understand. So if the contract was accidentally confusing, you could do a novation to the contract and replace it with a different contract that was not confusing. Offers and counter offers. We know buyers make the offer, and if the seller wants to make a counter offer, they can. That's called a counter proposal. That's where they agree to the majority of things, but are countering just one or two items. Title once under contract. The seller maintains legal title to the property until the title is transferred at closing. Okay, does that make sense? CJ, does that make sense? And CJ, at closing, how is the property transferred? What do we use to transfer the property?
Use a deed.
Good. What's a deed?
A deed is a
Ownership.
proof of ownership, or it gives ownership to whoever's in possession of the deed.
Okay. Tim, tell me what a deed is.
A deed is a legal document which has been signed by the transferor and is received by the transferee.
Close. Okay, yeah. So a deed is a piece of paper or
A
a
grantor.
document which
Grantor.
transfers the property from the grantor to the grantee. It requires the grantor's deed. It requires the grantor's signature, and the grantee just has to receive it. That's what the deed is. While under contract, we're in that executory contract, right? Because we're under contract. The buyer has a legal interest in the property as well. That's called equitable title. These rights vary from state to state. So if you're a buyer and you're under contract, you have some legal rights to that property. In fact, you have the right, the seller must sell to you even, okay? So that's what equitable title means. What is the outcome? Okay, somebody raise your hand. Keon, thank you. What is the outcome if the buyer makes an offer on two properties, one of which is countered and the buyer accepts by signing the counter proposal, while the second was immediately accepted and signed by the seller? It wouldn't be in your notes.
What is the outcome?
Yep.
Mix of it. So, which counter acceptance? I think the first one.
In this case, the buyer would be under contract on two homes. Both contracts are valid. The buyer is now under contract to purchase two homes. The buyer could have revoked either the counter proposal or the second offer at any time before acceptance by the seller. An exam note is something we've seen on the exam. Sellers can also revoke, meaning withdraw, a counter offer if they get a better offer from another buyer, as long as the first buyer has not signed and accepted the counter proposal, okay? Once the parties have signed, they're locked in. Before the other party signs, we can always pull it back, withdraw it. Is earnest money the consideration required for a valid contract? No. Earnest money is customary, although not essential for a purchase contract, as it provides evidence of the buyer's intention to carry out the terms of the contract in good faith. Consideration is something of legal value offered by one party and accepted by the other, such as the promise to pay the appraised value of the property, okay? Earnest money is only a way of demonstrating good faith. Earnest money is not required, okay? A seller could have a contract, could agree to a contract without earnest money, for instance. What are liquidated damages, CJ?
That is what the buyer is held accountable for.
And what happens if the buyer defaults on the contract to buy and sell? Say
Then
the
they-
day of closing, they just say, I'm getting a bad feeling about this. I'm not going to finish. What's the damage? What will happen to the buyer?
They will lose their escrow money.
Yes, they'll lose their escrow money. And what do we call that? What's another word for escrow money?
Their trust,
Good.
their
It's
trust,
trust
yeah,
money,
their trust funds.
also known as earnest money. Earnest money. Liquidated damages are the amount of money agreed to in writing that both the buyer and seller agree will compensate the injured party in the event of a breach of contract. We see this 99 times out of 100 with buyers, okay? Buyers. Buyers typically agree to liquidated damages. A real estate option is just when someone buys a right to purchase a property. They don't have to purchase it, but they have a right to purchase it. That's a real estate option. What is purchase money mortgage and how is it different from a land contract? So a purchase money mortgage, write this down, is the same as seller financing or owner carry. A purchase money mortgage is the same as seller financing or owner carry. So this is where I own my house free and clear, and I'm gonna move to Ohio, and Keon wants to buy my house. And I say, Keon, you don't need to go get a mortgage. I will be the seller and the bank. And we would sell a contract to buy and sell. She would legally own the property, and I would now be the bank that she would pay. That's called seller financing, owner carry, or purchase money mortgage. Make sure you guys know those three terms and know that they're synonymous. Otherwise, you'll feel very confused when you see them on the test. Okay? Purchase money mortgage means seller financing or owner carry. Now got that? Now there's something similar but distinctly different. And it's called a land contract. And it's also known as called a contract for deed. And it's also called an installment land contract. So write down those three things: contract for deed, land contract, or installment land contract. This is not a contract to buy land. This is another type of financing. In this type of financing, CJ, the person buying the property is a tenant until the entire house has been paid off. Then they get the deed. Then the legal title transfers. Okay? So in this case, I say, CJ, let's sign an installment land contract, and you'll be my tenant for 30 years. And you'll make payments for 30 years. And at the end of the 30 years, then I'll transfer the deed to you. At that point, you become the owner and I'm out, okay? Prior to that, you were more of a tenant and you just had equitable title. You didn't have legal title. You had equitable title that you got through the contract, but you didn't have legal title, okay? I was known as the vendor. You were known as the vendee. I was known as the vendor. You were known as the vendee. CJ, you would only agree to this nonsense if you could not get a mortgage from a bank, okay? Because it's generally 999 times out of 1,000, it's a bad deal for the vendee. Okay. Otherwise, they would have closed on it and got legal title. So this means at year 20, CJ, since you're more of a tenant, I could kick you out not with a foreclosure. I wouldn't need a foreclosure. I would just need an eviction. Eviction, easy. Foreclosure, hard. So it would be, I could just kick you out after 20 years of paying. Okay.
Mm.
So these are bad deals. Okay. Installment line contract, contract for deed, or land contract. That's what they're called. Okay. There's a lot of stuff that's borderline illegal with these types of contracts. Okay. You have to be very careful with them. And they're still out there. So be careful. Okay, number one, CJ. A real estate broker lists a woman's house for sale for $189,500. I think this must be in Plains, Kansas. Later the same day, a man comes into the broker's office and asks for general information about homes for sale in the 130 to the 140 price range, but refuses representation by the broker's company at this time. Based on these facts, which statement is true?
I would say B.
The woman is the broker's client. The man is a customer. Perfect. Because we listed the property, so there's a client relationship. The man was just a customer. All we owed him was honest and fair dealing. Keon, you're number two. Which of the following is considered dual agency?
It's number one.
A broker or a licensee with agency, fiduciary duty for both parties, buyer and seller, in the same key, very important, same transaction, very important. Number three, Tim, which of the following is a similarity? Which of the following is a similarity between an exclusive agency and an exclusive right to sell listing? So not how they're different, but how they're the same.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about this, but I think it's B.
Okay, so CJ, what do you think?
I think C.
Okay, why do you say C and not B?
Because exclusive agency doesn't say specifically sell or buy.
I also draw the distinction around both ties give responsibility representing the seller to one broker. Okay, I like that. This talked about show, and that's showing is just one of the many facets, whereas representing is everything. Representing is the whole group of fiduciary duties. Okay. Does that sound okay, Tim?
Yeah, I'm just noting down exclusive agency and right to sell.
Good. Okay, I think CJ, you're this one. A buyer signed an agreement with a broker to compensate the broker even if the buyer purchases the property from a relative. Okay, what's that called?
I would say B.
So what's the sister contract to be?
C then.
No. You're so a buyer signed an agreement with a broker to compensate the broker, even if, and that'd be under an exclusive right to buy. Okay.
Okay.
Keon, here we go. Oh, this is designated agency is most likely to occur when? when the buyer and the seller are represented by the same company. So this is where we want to designate the buyer to work with one broker and the seller to work with another broker and in the same company. And by designating them, we don't set up the illegal dual agency in Colorado. Okay, Tim, a 15-year-old boy recently inherited many parcels of real estate from his late father and has decided to sell one of them. If the boy enters into a deed conveying his interest to the property to the purchaser, such a conveyance would be?
Voidable.
Okay, CJ, the purchaser of real estate under an installment land contract.
D.
Exactly. Only equitable interest in the property until 30 years later when the deed finally transfers. Those are bad deals. Very good. We did excellent work. Any questions for me before we close out? You guys have a great weekend. Keep up the studying. It takes a lot of hard work. You can do it. Take care.